Welcome back. Now in this section, we will continue our discussion and we will try to see how we can make a table out of a structure. Now for that, I will comment the second structure here because we will be using the first structure, which is the sum structure, to create the table. So let me do that. Now, when you create a table, there are multiple ways to create tables in ABAP. Now, the first way which we will see is what we are going to do is we are going to create a table out of this sum structure, and the command is types. Again, we are creating a types here and types, and I will say table structure type, and here the new syntax or the changes comes is, and here we have to say standard table of, and what is the structure we want to create standard table of? Sum structure. So that is what we will put it here. Okay, so now what we have is we have a bare bone table, and let me call this my underscore table structure. Okay, so that is what the name we have given to this particular table, and this is just the type. It is not yet having any allocation in the memory of the variable. Now when we use the data here, and I can say okay, my table, and I will say here type my table structure. So with types, you are just creating a framework or a bare bone structure, and it is not actually the variable which is stored in memory, which can store values. When you use data, you are basically creating the variable which can store values. Now, this is the structure which is of a table, which represents a table, and each individual rows follow this particular sum structure format. The next thing is to add values to this table. Now before that, I would like to show you what the current scenario is or the current status is by putting a debugging point here at line number 44. Now if you try to put a debugging point in the data declaration, it will not allow. So you can see you cannot create a debugging point in that particular section or in that particular line of the code. So I'm not putting the debugging point in the data declaration, and let me run the code. It's already activated, and run the code and switch to the debugging perspective. And here if I try to see the my table variable by double clicking this, then you see here it is a of type standard table, and in the value you can see 0 multiplied by 3. What that means is there are actually 0 number of rows and there are 3 columns. And this is how you can see in the debugging perspective the details of the table. And here if you see ABAP internal table debugging, then you can see there are no rows here. There are 3 fields, and one is the field 1, field 2 and field 3. And in the column section, you can see individual columns and also what is their type and the length. Okay, so that is what we have currently. And what I will do now is I will try to add data here. And this is where we will use the new syntax. So the way to add data to this my table, the first way which I will show you is with the value keyword. So what I can do is let me just first comment out all this line of the code, and here I'm going to say my table equal to value and hash, and I can basically use the round bracket, and this round bracket represent the entire table. Now inside this round bracket, I have to use one more round bracket, and the inside round bracket actually represent a single row. And here what I can do is I can use the field 1, which is the column 1 name, and assign values. So I can say okay, some new value, and some new values, and in the field 2 I can add an integer value, say 30, and I can also use control space to look into what are the fields present within the particular table columns. So I can just select field 3 and I can say the value is 12. Okay, now the question comes is, okay, so I can just add the end statement here and save it. And now the question comes is how this particular control space know that what to show. Now, when I'm using my table and assigning value to my table with this value keyword, then what I'm saying that as per this table, I'm going to assign values here. The context of this editor in Eclipse knows through the left-hand side assignment operation. So because I'm assigning values with the value keyword to my table, so the my table fields or the type is what will be suggested to you in here. Now, the hash here is a representation to fill the type of the my table generically. Now, let me first run this example. Okay, so what I will do now is next I'm going to just out.write, and here I'm going to out.write the my table. So let me activate the code and run the code. And here you can see that the field 1, field 2, field 3 are all there. We have the some new value. And again, because the character length are 10, we have the limitation of length 10. So let me just remove this new from this field 1 so that it contains within the 10 character limit. And let me just activate and run the code. And you can see that the field 1 is having all the field 1 is showing properly. There was this limit of 10 characters which was stopping us to see the entire value of the field 1. And what I have done is I have added one row. Now in similar way, I can add the same thing because there is no limitation of the keys here. So I can just do that, and let me save it, activate, clear the console and run. And now if I try to run this code, do you think that my table will have multiple rows? And I just change here the value to 30, 40 and maybe 50. So do you think that multiple rows will be getting added to my table, or just a single row will be added? So let me save, activate and run the code. And what you see is the last assigned row is what got added. And the way to add multiple row is to use the brackets properly here. You have to basically say, okay, this is the first row, and when you assign this to my table, I also want the second row to be assigned, and here inside the first square bracket I assign the second line, and also in the similar fashion I can add the third line here. Okay, let me delete this particular code which is not required and save the code, save, activate and run, and clear the console and run. And what you see here in output, that the table has now 3 rows. So we are successfully able to create a table with 3 rows. Okay, so what we have seen so far is the use of value keyword and how we can use this value keyword to create a table. And this table is internally created within our code or within our ABAP program, where in the runtime the my table variable will hold a table. So it is also referred as internal table. And with the value keyword, we saw how to initialize value to the internal table. Now, just to overall see this picture, we have first created a structure, and the structure actually told us the structure actually defined what will be the columns of the table. Then we created a type for that particular table, and this time we have used the keyword type standard table of, and using the type we created a variable, and this is the table variable where we initialize the values with the value keyword. And with the value keyword we have the hash, and the hash tells the value keyword to generically finds the data type for the table, and we have the starting and the ending, and within that you have an internal square bracket represent individual columns. Okay, so this was the use of value keywords. Now the question comes is, what if I want to insert a extra column to this table? How will I do that? Now if we go below and see that we already have this value struct variable, and this represent a row for the table. Now this table have the same structure as of sum structure, so value struct can act as a row, and if I try to insert this row within this table, then what I can do is I can use the insert command. So I can say, then I can use the insert keyword. So I can say insert the value struct into table, and it will be, the table name is my table. Okay, so when I do that, and let me try to print the table before and after the statement. Let me save, activate, and run the code. And what you see here is there are 3 rows before I inserted the value struct to the internal table, and once we have inserted, then we have 4 rows. Now here we need to say field 3, just so that this is the column name, and let's save and activate, and therefore we are getting a 0 here. Now let's just run the code again. Now just to make it absolutely correct, and you can see that the sum value 10, 12 is getting added within our table. Now just to give you one more option to add data to the table, or tell you one more option, instead of insert I can also use append. Now append basically appends this particular row to the end of the table. Now if I use append, the syntax is append the row to the table name. Now if I do that, then there will be 5 entries because I'm doing the insert and also append, so 2 rows will be added. So I can say append where, so I will just activate, save, activate, clean the console, and run the code. Okay, so you can see that, so there are 2 entries added to the table. Okay, so this is a very basic scenario where we have told how you can create a structure, create a table out of that structure, and initialize value to the table, and then also insert and append to the table. Now with this we will be starting our journey towards table, and we will explore more about the tables, how to create tables, how to append, read with index, so all that operations which are simplified with the 7.4 and 7.5 syntax we will see in the coming sections. So let's continue with our journey. Okay, so 2 things we saw, that we can have a structure and we can basically take data from the database using this OpenSQL, and using this SQL, and we can then use that particular data within our code. Now we are using @data keyword here, and it basically gives the data or gets the data into a new variable, and this new variable is of type table, and this table we also printed. Now the next thing which we will see is what will happen if we have a structure and the structure is of a different type. For example, if I create a structure begins of str@ZPO head, and I will call it purchase doc, and let me use the same name here, and the type is character of length 10. Now a lot of time you see that the autocomplete will fill the capital, and you are writing from your own side in small letters, then that is okay. The capital and small will compile the same. Okay, then the next thing is description, and let me take this name as well here, description, type C, and length as 128. Okay, and the status is type C, length 1, and priority here type C and length 1. Okay, and we'll add one final purchase org. So this purchase org, we will say okay, type C, length 4, and we are just doing this second, doing the priority length as capital just for the aesthetic of all the lengths here to maintain. And okay, so let me add a comma here, and I will say end of the structure. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a table out of this particular structure, and I will say okay, type standard table of str_ZPO head. So just copy it and paste it, and now this particular table, my table, is not exactly the type of the SAP HANA database table, and I will remove this data keyword because we already have my table defined. Okay, so let's save it, and what we are seeing now is there is an error, and why we are getting an error. So if we read the problem here, then the type database table and the work area or internal table may not be compatible, and that is what exactly we wanted to show you. That so we have this my table, which previously we get the structure from the database itself, so the table is in the database, so we are directly saying that my table will be of type the database table here. But this time we are creating my table from a structure, so you can see that type standard table of str_ZPO head. And in our SQL, this basically is confused. Now how can I select data from this table, and which particular field should I assign what? So it will just give you an error, and what we are going to do now is I'm going to say okay, give me data in a different variable, and this variable need to be created, or I can just use the inline data keyword to create this variable inline. I can then use this particular variable. Now I can just do out.write, and it will give me and out.write this new data. Now this we have already seen, this will print the table. But what if I want the data in my table? So what is the right way to copy it? Because here we have some 5 fields, but here we have some more fields, which can happen that there are a lot of fields in the database table, and in your structure there are lesser number of fields. So how will the ABAP code will know what to assign where? So if I directly give the data my table equal to my table 01, so will it work? So if I just do that, it gives me an error because there is a type mismatch. So to solve this, what we will do, we will use a keyword called corresponding. So corresponding, and we will use a hash, and we will then pass the myTable01 inside it. So what the corresponding will do, it will see the matching corresponding field in the myTable01 and the matching corresponding field in myTable. So it will check from the name, and the hash here represent to take the value from the left hand side. So the output what this particular statement will give me will be of type whatever the type of myTable will be. Okay, so I will print this in the console in the line number 85, save it and activate and run the code. And what you see here in the console, now we are getting 3 tables, so it's better to clear the console and run again. No need to activate because we have the activated code. And actually we should get 2 tables. The first is the database table, which we are getting in my_table_01. Now in the code also, you may have many records in the database table, like millions can be there. So it's better to have first few records selected, maybe 5 records. So I will just say up to 2 records, 2 rows. So that is what the keyword is, and this will select only limited number of records, because it can happen that you are bringing a lot of data to your ABAP code, and if you for some chance have a lot of records in your database table, then your code here can be slow. So that may be one issue. So better to have this up to, and let me just use these 2 rows just to check if the up to works. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to activate this code, and I'm going to run the code, and you can see that 2 rows are printing. Now 2 will be very less, so it is better to have 5 at least, and we have 3 records or something like 5 records in the database table, so we'll see how much it is. So better to use 5, and I will activate this code and run. Okay, so we have ABCD 4 records in our database table, and which is less than 5, so we are actually seeing the 4 records. Okay, so the example here which we were dealing with have the use of corresponding keyword, and with corresponding you are giving the ABAP code opportunity. So we are giving the ABAP code the opportunity to do the mapping from its own side. Now what if the ABAP code is not able to understand how the mapping need to be done? For example, what if the description is DSC and the status is STA? So what will then the ABAP code do? So if I save it, and this time I will not print the table which we get from the database, and save, activate and run the code. And what you see here, ABAP code was not able to understand how to map the description and status. So in this scenario, what we are going to do is we are going to basically use the mapping keyword, and we'll manually say that the description here is equal to the description in our database table as the bigger description name. So DSC is equal to description. And many times you are confused that, okay, the left hand side is my structure name should I get, or should be the table name, and in the right hand side it's the structure field name or the table field name. So the best way is to use control space, and it will tell you and give you a lot of clarity. Now in the first control space before the equal to, you are seeing the structure keyword name. So you can say, okay, that means that the left hand side of this equal to of mapping will be the structure keyword, and the right hand side we have the database table keyword. Okay, then I will have the status here, and that's all. Save, activate and run. And what you see now, the table, my table, is getting populated successfully. Okay, so that is the use of corresponding. Now in the next section, what we will do is we will go through the variation of the standard table or different variation of the standard table with key, without key, empty key, and we will read from the database table and we will just try to print it. So overall, what we are trying to do is we are trying to operate on the standard table first, and we just saw a basic example of extracting data from the database table to your web code and the use of corresponding. And the first thing which we will try to do after this is to see the variations of standard tables, and after that we will see the variation of sorted table and then the hash table. Okay, so let's continue our learning.